topic, management accounting and budgeting in public sector, or specifically public sector organizations. Right, before I proceed, any questions on your assignments as well as today, management accounting and budgeting in public sector organizations. Okay, so in this lecture, we'll cover a general overview on management accounting role in public sector. Okay, and then we'll discuss on planning and control, budgeting in public sector organizations, and Islamic perspective of budgeting for Islamic state, Islamic state administration. Okay, can I start? Okay, those who just joined, let me just continue quickly on the topic, management accounting and budgeting in public sector organizations. Okay, the lecture content we'll discuss including the Islamic perspective for Islamic state, okay, public administration. Right, attributes of MA in public sector organizations. Special attention of MA in public sector is on the activities of the public sector. Outputs are not normally measurable. Okay, because sometimes some of the services are basically addressing some public problems. Costs are usually recovered by levying tax on the community rather than charging to users. So, so generally, you know, government, when they charge the users, the price is a heavily subsidized price. Okay, sometimes it's just a kind of token. So pretty much all the services are funded through or financed through taxation. Okay, that's a major source of income for the government. Costs of most public sector organizations are fixed at the beginning of the budget period. Right, so pretty much the big chunk of, you know, if you use traditional costing, then a significant part of costs are basically fixed costs. The level of activities is more predictable than in private sectors. Okay, that's why this also can be related to heavily dependent on budget allocation. Okay, for them to plan for their activities. Okay, once it is allocated, the budget is allocated by the parliament, so they have to maneuver within that allocation. Okay, it can be very restricted. Special focus on budgeting process to manage budget allocation distributed by the Treasury as the heart of management accounting in public sector organizations. Okay, so try to understand this, the budgeting process, how to make it, you know, efficient, and the distribution of the budget from the Treasury to all the executive arms in government agencies, so that they can deliver the services as efficient, as effective it can be. Right, these are the diagram, okay, developed by Prof. Jones and Prof. Pendlebury. Right, planning and control in public sector organizations. You can see that there is strategic planning. Yeah, I think at this point you understand what strategic planning is. So with the strategic planning, they have operational planning. Then with operational planning, then there is budgeting. So these are more towards operational budgeting, yeah, or annual budget. So operations most of the time relates to okay, the current year budgeting, yeah, current year operation. And then with the planning, there is control. So to make sure that what being planned, executed according to the plan, or implemented according to the plan. Otherwise, there is need revisions as needed. But of course, I mean, these are generally the idea of planning and control. I think the mechanisms are always there. We talk about planning as budgeting as a process, as well as control as a process. Okay. But at the same time, of course, I mean, in the literature, in management accounting literature, okay, including for public sector organizations, recognizing the dynamics of the environment. Okay. But to a certain extent, for public sector organizations, it's a bit limited because the approval process that need to take place when we talk about budget and budget allocation. Okay, planning decisions to pursue, develop, reject, undertake, delay, modify, or to abandon certain activities of public sector organizations. Or abandon, it can also be eliminate. So it means that not all government organizations to be there all the time. If the services somehow become irrelevant, they need to be revised or enhanced or modified. Okay, and the control to make sure that what being planned is implemented. Right, planning. There are two types of planning: strategic planning and operational planning. You can see these two types of plannings in private sector organizations. So it's equally applicable to public sector organizations. Okay. So if you look at strategic planning, planning to achieve the strategic and long-term objectives of public sector organizations, to achieve visions and missions of the PSO. Okay, generally, nowadays, all government organizations, they have visions and missions, okay, as a part of their strategic initiative, right? So strategic planning is basically to achieve those objectives and missions. So you can, in terms of period, strategic planning is between 3 to 5 years. Okay, so that's why I think in the government, at the government level, at the top level, we can have long term, okay, as well as medium term and short term planning. Okay, so medium term 5 years. Okay, in the case of Malaysian government, you have Malaysian plan, so it's a medium term. Okay, they also have a long term plan. Okay, at the government level, but here we are talking about at the organization level. Okay, so you need to be able to see when we discuss about government as a whole, and we talk about government agencies, government organizations. So PSA, when we talk about management accounting, is more at the organization level. Right, operational planning, planning for short-term actions plan for one fiscal year needed to achieve the strategic objective of public sector organizations. Okay, so you clearly mentioned short-term plan or short-term action plan for one fiscal year. Okay, so now generally government organizations, they, unlike the private sector, the accounting period can end in July or in May or in April. But for government organizations, always their planning is for the fiscal year, because the budget is provided for fiscal year. It means from January to December. Right, translating strategic planning into annual action plans. That is operational planning. Right, a bit more detail. Strategic planning, formulation of organizational objective within a strategic planning period, supporting long-term mission and vision. The overall aim and objective of public sector organizations depend very much on political priorities. Okay, political priorities of the ruling parties. So now we talk about PN in the case of Malaysia, right? If you look at US, it's by Republicans. Look at UK, it's by Conservative, right? Okay, you can apply this to your country as well for international students, as well as government policies. Okay, so for instance, a Malaysian plan or master plan, for major policies, normally they have master plan, okay, for 20 years, okay, for 10 to 20 years. So including, like in the case of Malaysia, it can be transportation, it can be digital technology, right? It can be poverty eradication. It can be human capital development, right? Okay, so mostly, of course, formalized as well as highlighted by the ruling party, ruling political parties in their manifesto, then translated into government strategic objectives. And input from stakeholders are essential at the formulation process. Okay, so definitely government organizations, political parties, when they develop their strategic objective and political priorities, they must take into account, of course, definitely the voters, but the voters are basically, they belong to groups of, different groups of stakeholders. Okay, operational planning is a short-term plan for one fiscal year period, developing the action plans required to achieve objective of strategic planning, breaking down the strategic plan into a series of targets to be aimed at and activities to be pursued within one fiscal period. Okay, that is provide the framework within which the organization will operate in order to achieve its strategic objectives. Strategic planning, operational planning, they must also have performance targets, performance KPIs. Can be expressed in financial and non-financial terms. But I mean, you can say that for the government, non-financial terms or non-financial KPIs, given more considerations, okay? And it's hardly you can say the financial performance targets that can be translated or equal to profitability measures. Okay, hardly you can find that, except if the government organizations are basically companies, okay, or profit-making companies. Other than that, they are mostly non-profit making. Right now, we move to categories of stakeholders. So here, there are groups of the three: internal, external, as well as funders and regulators. Okay, so if you look at the question there at the top, who is the most dominant stakeholder? Right, internal, you can see that the management, including the controlling officers, land managers, civil servants, okay, external customers, suppliers, general public, political masters, the funders and regulators, okay, of course, the head of the state, Yang di Tuan Agong, the king. You can see the role of the king recently. I mean, the operation of our rule in the country is a democratic system. So you can see the important role of the king to maintain the democratic system. And okay, of course, the head of the executive, the prime minister, the treasury, and the parent ministry. So you can see that there's also one parent ministry there. It's quite new for you, because every government agencies, generally they have parent ministry. And within the parent ministry, headed by the minister, okay, as well as an elected civil servant, and the chief secretary for the ministry, okay, for the appointed civil servant. Right, so come back to the question, who is the most dominant stakeholder? Or maybe you can phrase it, who should be the most dominant stakeholder? Okay, maybe I want to see some answer. Is there any answer?
External.
Oh, coming. Sorry? Who is the dominant stakeholder? And who should be the dominant stakeholder?
Public. General public.
General public should be, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, other answer? Only one answer. Okay. Right. Okay. Look at this back. Huh? Okay. If you look at this, yes, general public, but maybe general public for the government as a whole, huh? Because general public also reflecting voters. But for government organization, specific government organizations, if you think about, let's say, we look at your assignments. Is some group handling COVID-19, right? So yeah, for the Ministry of Health or the hospitals, who should be the main or dominant stakeholder? Let's say we talk about, okay, trade involving in development of SMEs. So who should be the main stakeholder? Dominant stakeholder. Because the implication of dominant stakeholder is they can attract the most funding, the most budget allocation for them. Okay, in other words, the budget allocation should be spent on them. Okay, so just to cut it short, it should be customers, target customers. Okay, for government organization, it should be target customers. So, but the idea of customers, do they exist in government agencies, and government organizations? They do, because that's part of public sector reforms. And they introduce quality initiatives into the government. So each government, they must have customers. That's why if you go to government agency, their counters, you can see clients charter. Okay, customers or clients are the same. So they are target customers. Suddenly you become very quiet. Yeah, stay, isn't it? Or you agree or disagree? So many meanings. Generally, when we say customers, customers always always
Always right.
Okay, you got it, Right, that's the concepts that should be there in government organizations. Okay, so it's tough, it's not easy, but it should be there. Okay, so that's what in this class. Yes.
Does that mean that customers are of the general public, or those are to the separate people?
Okay, that's what I'm saying. Every government organizations, they should identify their customers. Okay, but of course they are coming from general public. So if you look at let's say schools, okay, so who are the customers in schools? Can be parents, okay, it can be general public. Let's say if you look at inland revenue, okay, so who are the customers for inland revenue? So the taxpayers. The taxpayers are the clients and customers for inland revenue. So let's say the hospitals, who are the customers? Of course, you cannot simply say general public. Of course, they are coming from general public, but they are patients that need treatment at the hospitals. So that's what I'm saying when we say customers, right? Okay.
Okay, sir.
Right, and then I also highlight the role of elected civil servant versus appointed civil servants in the case of budgeting. I think both of them have an important role, right, in preparing the budget as well as to highlight what are important issues or matters that need to be highlighted during the budget. So of course, for the government budget as a whole, you can see now a very active process of the government engaging the stakeholders, business communities particularly, to make sure that their needs can be addressed. So I give example here, when there was a plan to tax online business. So YB Khairi Jamaluddin, that time he was the sport minister. So he was commenting on the danger of charging business tax for online business, because the sector was still new. So you can see, they have influence on how things have been planned for the country. Okay. So any question there? There was a noise. Okay. If you're not, you don't have question, you turn off your mic. All right. Who affect the most government organizations in prioritizing the activities? Okay. So these basically stakeholders, right? So group of stakeholders just now, they can be grouped into this. Okay. So if you look at this y-axis and x-axis, level of interest as well as power. I mean, this is part of stakeholders management that can be done. Can you turn off your mic? Let me help. I turn off first. Okay, come back. Right. so if you look at this, there are groups of stakeholders that can have high level of interest. Okay, but in terms of power, also very high. So they call it key players. Huh? So high power means they can change, they can influence, very influential, as well as they have level of interest. So you can see that they are grouped as key players. There are another groups they have high level of interest, but their power is low. Okay, so keep them informed. It means that update them. Okay, why they need to be updated? Okay, one of the reasons is this group of stakeholders, they can change from low power, it can become high power as well. Okay, so that because if once they become high power and their interests are not addressed, then it can really make a big change, have high impact. But there are also you can see low power as well as low interest. So it's just that minimal effort. So maybe just keep them, make sure that they keep informed. But it's not as important as if they are with high interest as well as if they are key players. Okay, right, we move. Okay, I think from this slide, the message is basically the group of stakeholders, they can be low power, but they can change to become key players. Okay, so I think one good example you can see nowadays in the US, where the women groups as well as the color groups or people, they become, basically they go against Trump in his presidential bid in the election. Okay, stakeholders' power. So what is the source of power? It can be their position, personal, because of the resources they have, expertise they have, or based on the systems. Okay, can be source of power. So how to manage? The government agencies, they can manage through satisfying. Okay, so make sure that their needs are being addressed. Sequential attention, because this one is different groups of stakeholders depending how important they are. Okay, it can be addressed. Exercise of power, because public sector organizations. Okay, sometimes the use of power is needed, as well as side payments to make sure that they can be satisfied with their needs. Discussion. Okay, based on the discussion up to this point, do government organizations have autonomy for policy making, strategic planning, and operational planning? Okay. Second question, challenges to balance between freedom to manage and control of public services in light of improving and serving public interests. Okay, take 1 or 2 minutes to ponder that question and provide answers. All of you, are you okay?
We're okay.
Yes, Brother Amirul, what is your answer?
I think I agree that government do have autonomy for policy making, strategic planning, and operational planning.
Okay, Nur Fatihah?
Yes, I also agree. Government have the autonomy for policy making, strategic planning, as they are the higher hierarchy in.
Okay, right. I agree with you, definitely. But here the question, so read question carefully. The question, they don't say the government, they say government organizations. Okay, so that's what you must have in your mind. When you talk about government here, we're not talking about prime minister only. We're not talking about parliament only. We are talking about URA. We are talking about public transport department. We are talking about hospitals. Okay, so do they have autonomy for policy making, strategic planning, operational planning? Because If you look at this, definitely strategic as well as operational planning, they have the autonomy. But the policy making, okay, generally that is at the government level. Sometimes need approval from the parliament. So it's more broad-based, the direction. Let's say the government decide on investing in IR 4.0. Okay, so that is become a policy for the government. Definitely, the government organizations, they must adapt and they must follow. When they invest, let's say they want to buy new IT infrastructure. So instead of they just focus on the old technology, they must also support the government policy for IR 4.0. Okay, and nowadays, I don't know, is there any 5.0? Okay, now, okay, it's coming, isn't it? So just as an example, challenges to balance the freedom to manage and control of public services. Okay, I think this question, okay, it's good that government organizations, they have the autonomy, they have the flexibilities because they deal with their target customers directly. Okay, they need, because at their level, they can serve their target customers better. But at the same time, there must be certain level of control because too much flexibilities can lead to more power, lead to anyone?
Distraction.
Distraction. Why, brother, distraction?
Because they tend to do align with their personal interest compared to public interest because there's no one that can overcome their power.
Exactly. So the risk is there. The risk of abuse of power can be very high. So that's why freedom is good, autonomy is good, but must be under control. Or in other words, freedom is more consistent in the low corruption environment. Okay, with high corruption environment, sometimes it's good to have very bureaucratic government. Okay, but the problem is bureaucratic government can be very slow. Okay, so you can see, that's options that in the hands of the government, how they want to provide the services to the public. Right, now we move on to budgeting in public sector organizations. Okay, so I remind you one more time. So we are referring to organizations, not the government as a whole. Of course, I mean, in terms of process, it starts from the parliament, but at the end, how this budget be allocated for each agency and how they manage the budgets. Okay, because normally accounting, okay, of course, there are accounting for government as a whole, more towards the financial reporting. Same time, there is a, at the organizational level, okay, how it works. Okay, now I think we are at the corner. I mean, the next year budget is around the corner to be tabled to the parliament. Even if you look at what happened recently, there was a move to declare emergency. This also was mentioned to be related to the next year budget. Okay, so yeah, how important it is. But I think the King, the Agong, made it very clear that the next year budget should be approved by the parliament because it's pretty much needed to address the COVID-19. Okay, the frontliners need to be supported, all their needs need to be addressed because they are basically, I mean, the whole country and the whole government should function addressing the pandemic. So if you look at the budget, budget is a detailed plan to show the financial consequences of an organization, operating activities for a specific future period. Okay, so here still I'm talking about 1 year period. It acts as a financial model that summarizes future operations and is usually viewed as a core component of organization planning and control. That's why if you look at budgeting, budgeting is not only, of course, in accounting, we learn it specifically, but actually is a management tool. Ways of, I mean, every manager, once you hold the managerial position, you will get directly involved in the budgeting process. Okay, this definition given by Professor Langfield Smith and his colleague and her colleague. Okay, for objective of budgeting in public sector by Coombs and Jenkins, Prof. Coombs, right? Fiscal policy mechanism. Okay, so it's basically government expenditures is important. It's one of the major expenditures in the economy. Okay, so that's why it becomes fiscal policy to stimulate the economic activities. But they cannot just spend. They must spend in the right place. Okay, I think globally, I think all governments across the globe have learned their lessons. They cannot just spend, because previously the understanding they can just spend to stimulate the economy. But if they spend in the wrong place and not efficient, then it can lead to waste as well. It cannot stimulate the economy as it should be. Secondly, planning and control of expenditure level. Okay, because government can only work while it's been authorized. They can only use the budget that has been approved. Okay, so that's why it become planning and control of expenditure level. I mean, as a planning. Third, authorization of expenditures. Okay, authorization by the parliament for the budget, as well as within the government agencies. Okay, there are authorization process as well. Communication device, okay, between budget holders, managers, okay, within the organization, within the government, between the ministries and the government and the treasury, as well as between executive and the parliament. Motivation of managers, yeah, I mean, they achieve, because with the budget that they receive, okay, based on their planning and their proposal, and they can get, I mean, receive, they can execute, achieve their expected performance. Okay, so in the budgeting process, there are two roles. One is for planning, okay, the other is for budgetary control. So these two stages. One, of course, budget preparation, because planning is a lengthy process for government organizations. So if you think about one government agency, okay, let's say not any other rural development. Good example can be Ministry of Rural Development. Okay, so they have their office at the state level, as well as related to maybe at the local level. So all these program and activities planned at the state level need to be coordinated and synchronized at the federal level. Okay, so all these process need to be undertaken. So that's why planning is time consuming as well. Okay, all the state directors, okay, all the top management, they come together to plan. And so that's why the planning with the extensive amount of resources needed to plan. So this need to be, of course, they expect that to be executed. So that's why budgetary control is needed. Okay, budget maximization and issue. Okay, budget maximization. So it means it's basically a budget holder, ministers or managers, a public service manager, try to maximize their budget allocation. Okay, why? To appear performing better than others, or in a way that so that they can perform better. How that can happen? Competition and limited public resources. So good manager is the degree of their ability to put forward his agenda into priority lists of government organizations. Okay, so okay, in a way, right, for them to be good managers, they should be able to make sure that their agenda become a government priority list. Then they can receive the right attention and the support in terms of financial support in the form of budget allocation. Can you hear me, class?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Okay, so with that, I mean, what you can learn about budgeting, okay, what is equally applicable to in the private sector. We talk about effective budgeting. That also can be applied in terms of in the budget preparation in the case of public sector organizations. Okay, so effective budgeting, including quality planning, right? So quality planning must feedbacks from customers, major stakeholders need to be taken into account based on the capacity of the government agencies. So they have to plan for their capacities, capabilities, competencies, systems, infrastructures. And then features of budgeting, devolved budgeting, participative budgeting, okay, more autonomy at the lower level. These are all attributes of effective budgeting. So that's why devolved budgeting means for budget, how they being utilized at the operational level. So the line managers need to be heavily involved. Okay, and then once with that, so there must be good support from the top management as well as the treasury and parent ministry. So they must support the operational. But of course, I mean, when they develop their plan, must be inconsistent with the framework provided by the government. Then it's easy for them to get the support. Okay, in a way that when they want to provide their services to their target customers. Right. I also put others. So anyone can suggest what are other attributes for effective budgeting? Anyone? Effective budgeting. You like to write, huh? Okay. Right. Okay. Maybe I call names, huh? It's good to call names. Tanvir. So, any additional effective budgeting?
Effective budget. Developing budgeting. Sir, these budgeting are all the budget that government makes in a year.
Okay. Right. Okay. Think about it, huh?
Yes, sir.
Right. I move on. Okay. Next, financing public expenditures, Islamic perspective. Huh? So what should be there in the Islamic state? Okay, functions of Islamic states, provisions of basic necessities, including food, shelter, clothing, education, transportation. The broad objective to establish a good society with justice, peace, and security. Okay. Budgeting in Islam, okay, particularly in the case of Islamic State, okay, there is a welfare budget, including zakat and sadaqah. Of course, zakat with specific beneficiaries. Okay, sadaqah is more general than zakat. Okay, but in light of helping the poor and needy. Okay, another general budget through jizya or tax for public administration, okay, as well as the development. But in any case, I think the slide also mentioned about cut your coat according to your clothes. Huh? So it means that you spend what you have. Huh? So in budgeting, and government budget, it calls a balanced budget. Okay, it's a balanced budget. But balanced budget is very difficult to achieve. Okay, mostly, I think if you look at countries across the globe, basically they are facing budget deficit. Huh? Only maybe one country that is having a budget surplus instead of deficit. So which country is that? Most likely? Anyone? Country, government with a budget surplus, not budget deficit. Okay, you can check. Okay, I think one country could be China. Huh? China. Others, but particularly the developing countries, mostly their budget is budget deficit. Okay, but budget deficit, definitely they fill the gap is by taking loans. Okay, but as long as the loans is manageable, under still within within control, I mean that is fairly okay. Yeah? Public expenditures in Islam, principle of public expenditures have been laid down by under Ottoman Empire. Huh? The principal criterion for all expenditure allocations should be for the well-being of the people, for the interest of public, okay, public maslahah. The larger interests of the majority should take precedence over the narrow interests of a minority. The removal of hardship and injury must take priority over the provision of comfort. A private sacrifice or loss may be inflicted to save a public sacrifice or loss, and a greater sacrifice or loss may be averted by imposing a small sacrifice or loss. Whoever receives the benefit must bear the cost. If you look at the last point, okay, it's not necessary that public service should be for free, yeah, okay, so certain amount of charge can be made. This is including wakaf as well. I mean, it doesn't mean that wakaf should be free, but at least it can cover the basic costs or the cost offering the services. Permanent heads of expenditures as prescribed by Sharia. Okay, so it means that these need to be provided in the budget. Defense, law and order, justice, need fulfillment. Okay, as it can be addressed through zakat and sadaqah. Dawah, inviting to deeds of Allah, enjoining rights and forbidding wrong, amal ma'ruf and al-munkar. Okay, these are very unique for Islamic State or Islamic government. Fulfillment of social obligation, fard kifaya, as the private fails to provide. Okay, so fard kifaya is very important because these are all services needed by the Muslim ummah, but somehow, okay, if not everybody should provide, at least the services should be sufficient, okay, to serve the ummah. Okay, and it is very open and very dynamic in nature, as well as civil administration. So these budgets should be provided by the government. There are expenditures based on the contemporary needs in light of Sharia, protection of the environment, supply of necessary public goods, and then prescribed by permanent expenditures, scientific research, economic development, subsidies for priority private economic activities. Okay. Right. So actual scope is determined by maslahah, public interest, as well as market failure. I think this also need to be taken into account in fardu kifaya. Intended to serve all equitably without discrimination, to eliminate poverty and build strong economy. More importantly, to provide conducive environment for Muslims to practice Islam and for the non-Muslim to get attracted to the beauty of Islam. Okay. Conclusion, budgeting in public sector provides link between strategic objective and operational plan. Stakeholders determine budgeting priorities with customers of public sector organizations should be the main focus. Budget allocation is meant for fiscal tool as well as for quality public services. Budgeting from Islamic perspective, promoting and achieving maqasid of Sharia. Okay, so I think pretty much that's about the lecture for today. Any questions? Are you still here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I hope I don't, make you feel very boring to death, huh? Okay, any question?
Okay, sir. Okay. It's all right. I mean, we understand.
Okay, understand. It's good. You read carefully. Try to contemplate. Then when you do your assignments, try to learn as much as you can. Because exam question can be direct, it can be indirect. Okay. Okay, through discussions, through examples, and I will look at also your assignments, how you basically discuss things. But in any way, I mean, the basic is basically at the end, you should be able to appreciate how government organization works. Okay, because public money is a lot being spent, but to make sure that they are within the right framework to spend, to provide good services. I think that's the best broad concepts when we discuss these things. Okay. Right. If no answer, I think I will end this lecture. Okay. So if you have any questions, you can ask me right after this. I will wait for a few minutes. And otherwise, okay, so we end this lecture with wa taufiq wal hidayah.
Sir, do we have class
Assalamualaikum.
on Thursday?
Sorry?
Do we have class on Thursday?
Thursday is holiday, okay? Is holiday for the Maulud Nabi. So you must celebrate Maulud Nabi.
Okay. Assalamualaikum.
Okay? So the session will continue in the next week, inshallah. So I end this, huh? Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.